So we're delighted to be working with you. And as I mentioned at the outset, we have this kind of strong focus on connections and collaboration. That's what Dublin BIC does. So I'm delighted to ask Michael Culligan, who's the CEO of Dublin BIC, to join us and say a few words. Michael, over to you.
I think the first thing to say is I'm absolutely thrilled that we're hosting this Innovation Exchange event here in the Guinness Enterprise Centre. This is a special location. Some of you are familiar with it, maybe others, maybe not quite to the same level. And if you haven't been here, please do and try and do so over the next little while. It was set up originally in the late 1990s when there were very few incubation centres in the country. And it was the largest single building enterprise centre in the country already. And pre-pandemic, we were at maybe 90% capacity here for about 4 years in a row. And we were embarked on a very ambitious project to double the size of it. And the idea of the enhanced GEC, which the project has completed during the pandemic, is a global entrepreneurial super hub. The idea is interconnected locally, nationally, and internationally. And in that context, to give some examples, because we're here to talk about innovation this morning, and the Innovation Exchange is to facilitate that. But innovation is about collaboration, and innovation are symbiotically, I suppose, interconnected. They're bedfellows. And if you look at a place like the GEC here, we're partnered with about 35 to 40 business schools globally, the likes of HEC in Paris, Columbia in New York, Kellogg School of Management, and MBA teams in those schools do projects with companies in the centre here or with companies in regional centres around the country that are interconnected with here. If I think of the GEC and I look back a little while, one of the projects that started here, probably going back for probably 6 or 7 years at this stage, time flies, tempest fugit, etc., was a project called The Bridge. My colleague John Phelan, who's here with us, and I think it was David O'Mara from a company called Havoc, who were a global leader in games engine software, had this observation that the animation industry in Ireland at the time, while growing significantly, that there was a bit of a gap between people coming out of college and getting into that world. So a very small project of about 30k started up with 5 or 10k from ourselves at Dublin BIC, Enterprise Ireland, a few other people. And the idea then was to bridge people from college into the animation world. That has since accelerated to become what is now the Animation SkillNet. And SkillNet Ireland have about 65 SkillNet programs. And I think it's fair to say that the Animation SkillNet is one of those flagship programs that really is making a serious difference. My ambitions and our ambition with SkillNet and ourselves for the Innovation Exchange, which we're here today about, are similar. In fact, beyond that, I think it can be really something very, very significant. If I look at the center here, the physical is the threshold requirement to play in the game. Scale is enormously important, but actually it's what happens then with the soft connectivity, people, collaboration, interaction, all of that. Kind of companies that are here in the center today include the likes of Food Marble, recently moved in with us, and this idea of take the guesswork out of eating, in terms of addressing people who have difficulties with different foodstuffs, etc. We have companies here like Binatel, a global leader in 5G and technology. These guys are leading now in the new microcell area. You have companies here in the center like Celio Medical, the number one lung cancer in the world, or the number one cancer in the world alongside breast cancer is lung cancer. If you have lung cancer, you have a biopsy. If you have a biopsy, you have a 30% chance of having a collapsed lung. The guys here are addressing that problem. And maybe a little vignette to show you what can happen in a place like this, which I now consider to be a physical and a virtual center as it grows into the future. But there was a company here a few years ago, a chap actually out of Dublin City Council, who set up a business in what's kind of non-sexy area of fats, oils and greases, of compliance with that. And he set up a software business in that regard. There was a visit here from San Jose City, and Michael O'Dwyer, who headed up that business, went in and chatted to the guys. They invited him to come to California to showcase what he was doing. They signed the contract with him for San Jose City. He's in the States now in over 40 cities around the States. And that's this idea of collaboration and innovation, and I guess interconnecting those together. Thanks to SkillNet for the partnership with this project, and thanks to the GEC who are sponsoring and supporting the project here today. We're here to talk about innovation. I suppose one of the observations, I guess, which is, we're seeing over the last 18 months is innovation at warp speed. So there's a lot of talk around as if all the new innovation has happened. I kind of have a little bit of a perspective, while of course there's enormous innovation. Actually, to some degree, what's happening over the last period of time is adaptation, and it's the rate at which we're adapting. And a lot of the technologies we've come to use already existed. But it's very hard to get people to, to change, etc. And look at the father of entrepreneur or of innovation is Schumpeter, the Austrian economist, and that's the whole idea of out with the old, in with the new, creative destruction. That happens all the time. I think all that's happened now is necessity, the mother of invention. We've been forced to adopt some of these technologies at much, much greater speeds than would previously have been the case. Now, of course, that itself then takes us further along, and because we're doing that, then it creates maybe more opportunities. And if you look at what's happening today, a lot of the language, if we move on and look at government policy, a lot of the language out of Europe, and not just the language, the money now is the future is digital, the future is green. We're here talking about digital transformation. I suppose the Innovation Exchange is focused in that area. I've no doubt whatsoever in a little while we won't be talking about it in the same way that once we spoke about e-commerce and that just became business, digital transformation will just become what we do as part of business on a day-to-day basis. But sometimes, you do need to, I suppose, support and seed these things. If I look at Ireland overall, I'm enormously enthusiastic and positive about where we are from an innovation perspective. But we have to remember the bar keeps getting set higher and higher all the time internationally. And, if you want to set up a new business, you have to do one of two things. You've either got to create a new business or you've got to steal someone's lunch. People don't tend to give it up too easily. They fight pretty hard to keep it. And if you want to create a new business, that's the hardest thing to do. And in that regard, one of two things is happening. You're either very, very clever and you come up with something that nobody else did, and there are 7 billion people in the world. So when you come up with something new, you have to ask yourself the question, well, is it that I've come up with that? Or is it sometimes people come up with solutions that meet needs, but maybe you can't get it to the market in an economic manner? So, when you come up with something new, there's a whole range of, I suppose, elements that feed into whether or not you can make the journey on that. But I am extremely enthusiastic and positive of what I see for Ireland. If I look at the quality of the startups and scale-up companies that are coming out of Ireland today compared to perhaps 10 years ago, there are a larger number of people with greater ambition, what I would call these gazelles, the subset of the startups. There's a lot of activity in startup, and there should be, and that's what's required at the top of the funnel. But if you move down the funnel, there are a larger number of companies, as I say, with greater ambition, who can have a clear vision of where they want to go, who are surrounding themselves with the right kind of people and are bold and global in their ambitions. And that's exactly what we require here in Ireland. So I'm enthusiastic and positive about it. One of the things that I've observed over many years, and we do a whole range of things in the organization, is that never a prophet in your own land. And it really gets me a little bit that I see some fantastic companies and they'll end up and they'll go to New York, company like NewsWhip headed by Paul Quigley, and they'll win business with Bloomberg, and they won't have won business here domestically. And it just seems a bit of a pity. And that's actually the genesis of where we came with the Innovation Exchange. It seems such a pity that some of these companies have to go and prove themselves internationally and around the world before they can make it at home. So the idea of the Innovation Exchange came from that, and the idea that, well, on one hand, as we all know, culturally it's challenging for large organizations to innovate because they have SOPs, standard operating procedures, and you don't have that flexibility or whatever, and the culture is a particular way in a large organization. On the other hand, over here, you have the gazelles, or the subset of the startup companies who are basically innovation 101. That is what they do all day long. So we had the sense that if we could bring those together and maybe cover some of the areas that Liz was referring to in the question earlier there, in terms of making both sides understand each other a little bit. Now, we don't underestimate the challenge that is involved there in culturally making a change in let's say in a multinational in that regard. But it would be my experience that what happens a lot of the time is people are genuinely just incredibly busy in these multinationals. And some of the time what happens is it's really early stage startups to come and engage with them. And that just doesn't work. It's a reality. On the other hand, you have a subset of startups who are really good and have really good products and really good offerings. And our sense was that if we could bring those guys together with the multinationals, that we could untap something. And the idea there is not necessarily that the startup or scale-up company will create something new for the multinational. It may very well be that they have a solution already and with a slight little tweak or adaptation, it could meet a need in the multinational. So I think there's a greater openness in multinationals because, with the warp speed of change, and there's always a concern with larger companies that they'll miss out on the next big thing, etc. So there's a balance there, and we're hopeful that the Innovation Exchange, which is currently in pilot form, can be something that will make a significant difference. If I think of ourselves maybe moving on as an organization, Dublin Business Innovation Centre, innovation is in the name, it's been around for a long time. Our role in life is to empower entrepreneurs to start and scale internationally traded businesses, and in particular to try and make game-changing impacts to those businesses. And that manifests itself in a number of ways. One of those is the business advice side, where you're working with the company to get them ready with their business planning and finances and pitch decks and all that. The second area is money, access to money. We run and manage the business angel network on the island of Ireland, and we also have run seed venture funds in the past and have a new seed venture fund, the Ireland Smart Tech Fund, which is a really unusual fund by entrepreneurs, for entrepreneurs, and that's very active in the marketplace right now. And I guess looking at all of those over time and looking at the cohort of really good companies that come out of that, as I say, we observed that there was a challenge that they don't always make it at home. And the idea now hopefully is that can be addressed through the Innovation Exchange. I mean, in terms of innovation, I suppose maybe I probably meant to comment a little bit earlier. If you look at some sectors in particular that have been really advanced, the likes of telehealth or digital health, you take companies like Silver Cloud Health, which started out of the NDRC next door to us here in 2013 with Ken Cahill. Now, they have a software platform for people with mental health challenges. And they were making significant progress, very significant. And Ken, wonderful leader, moved to the States to lead that business and to take it to the end. They've been acquired in the last few months there, maybe 6 months ago, for 300 million, having been set up in 2013. But even more so, the impact that they're making with what they're delivering and the number of people's lives that they'll impact is hugely, I suppose, just phenomenally impressive. But that's an industry that, because of the pandemic and the changes that have happened there, that has been allowed to accelerate in a way that it would not otherwise have been the case. I think you're starting to see the same in industries like edutech, or education technology area. Great example of that is Learn Upon with Brendan Nowd. Again, learning management system platform. There were already lots of large learning management systems, and these guys probably had a nimble, newer, greater UI, UX, flexible, better pricing options, etc., and just started to grow, and again have grown dramatically, raised over 50 million there in the last year. There's a young company here in the centre, very young and early stage, called Examfly with Deirdre and Ashling, and they're bringing gamification to the area of tax exams and accounting exams, an area not particularly exciting, but reflective of the reality of how people, younger generation, maybe consume data today, and bringing that about. So I suppose my observation here is that, at an Ireland Inc. level, on one hand, the bar gets higher and higher all the time internationally, but on the other hand, we ourselves are producing higher numbers of better startups. That happens in particular in other areas, medical device area. I refer to Celio Medical. It's happening in that area in a big time. And what's interesting more recently now, perhaps, is in manufacturing-related areas, which traditionally would not, or would have probably dipped over the years, but they're coming back in. And I heard Tim asking a question there. I think WRXflow, correct? The Workflow, yeah. Tim from Workflow, who's a super example of that right now. So, it's interesting, I think, with the, maybe some of that manufacturing and things, which maybe, that world changed a little bit, but with the level of innovation and the shrinking of the world, that some of those things and the software for those can be done out of here. So listen, I don't have too much more to say, other than if I look at ourselves as an organization where our role is to empower entrepreneurs to start and scale by providing advice, by providing funding, and doing that in the startup and the scale-up area. The next logical thing strategically for us was to be able to enable those scale-up companies to connect with multinationals. When I say multinationals, Irish or international, I see the Innovation Exchange as a route to doing that. We already had a very, well-received event, FutureScope, which quickly became the number one innovation event in the country. And that's back on with us next year in March in person, hopefully in the convention centre again. So we had relationships, as has been referred to in the earlier conversation, in place with multinationals. But I think the thing now for us, in making game-changing impacts or supporting those scale-up companies is to try and facilitate connections into those multinational companies. We're in the pilot phase, as it has been referred to, and I consider it, if we can get this platform right for connecting the best of the scale-up companies with the multinationals, I think mutually beneficial and really game-changing. So I hope that's the case. Delighted to be here this morning. Not sure what I'm doing time-wise, Conor, but we're probably more or less okay, are we?
Brilliant.
Yeah. So listen, I'm happy to take any questions, but without further ado, maybe leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Michael, for coming in. Appreciate the overview.